Payback.
Hitting that dash me.
It was around 6 or 7 years ago when I was back in high school. My friend and I, who also happens to be Asian, we were both heading towards this graduation party.
So as you normally would, he parked on the side of the street.
As he happened to open his door to leave, this car came out from nowhere, zooming up the hill. It's a normal suburban street. Wasn't even close to hitting that car. But then what happened next is something that I'll never forget.
This mom, this fucking Karen, just literally has the audacity, as she's driving with her kid in the back seat, and yells out, rolls down her window and yells out,
Fuck you, you fucking chinks. Fucking chinks.
I still hear it to this day.
Bro, you don't even understand. When I heard that shit, I was so pissed. Yeah, I mean, the audacity, right? She just drives off and she didn't even think twice. She didn't even hesitate. She just rolled off her tongue. And it was broad ass daylight too. We just looked at each other after that, just in pure shock. But actually one of the first things that I thought about was that kid in that back seat. And it just shows on how racism can be taught and just passed down between generations. No kid just comes out of the womb being like, oh, I fucking hate chinks, you know? And so after that, we just decided to go inside the graduation party. But the whole time, all I could think about was the realization that racism against Asians is so downplayed. It's just simply not taken seriously.
Because for a lot of Asians, their experience is completely invisible.
Think about it. People never have any hesitation when it comes to making fun of Asians.
This is a perfect example. Whenever people would make a black joke, right, they would always just like look around and like say it in silence. But when it comes to Asian jokes,
There's been so many instances where people just said the most racist shit to me like I'm not even there.
And that's a common experience for a lot of Asian Americans.
people won't look back twice when saying an Asian joke.
There are a lot of factors behind it.
And I think a lot of people have heard a lot about this called the
Other minority myth, right? Where essentially Asians are presented as subservient, hardworking, highly educated, law-abiding citizens. And you know, they make the most out of any other group. So no way they face racism or discrimination. No way. What's damaging about the model minority myth is that it essentially just creates a racial wedge between, I think, the black community especially. Essentially just a direct contrast to white people's idea of the black community. What will never get talked about are the blatant barriers in place and discrimination that essentially penalize Asians for doing well. I mean, the perfect example of all this is the lawsuits against
Harvard. They discriminate against Asians.
Obviously, this is just a simplified version, but the plaintiffs were able to gain access to the admission files at Harvard. And what they found was that although Asians were objectively killing it at test scores and extracurriculars,
Asians have the lowest chance of getting in.
Because of that, the fucking Harvard is saying, hey, we're going to be racist against you because we know you're not going to complain.
It's literally kind of like capping the amount of black people there are in the NBA because there's just too many of them. It's essentially eliminating a lot of the merit that colleges are supposed to be founded on.
And what really made me think how invisible Asians are when I realized that even in the whole woke performative bullshit, Asians weren't even included in that conversation. So when the whole George Floyd protests were at its height, previous company that I worked for, they held this diversity talk thing, kind of like a slideshow saying that, hey, we're not racist and we love minorities and all that.
And what I realized during that entire talk was there was not a single mention around Asian Americans for COVID and a lot of the discrimination and hate crimes that we were facing as a community, as well as our own struggles in the corporate world as well. The whole talk was to address inequality that's been happening in the company, but that was never addressed. So when it came time to ask questions, I spoke up. Hey, I noticed that there was no mentions of any of the COVID attacks that have been happening against Asians, as well as, the struggles such as the bamboo ceiling. This isn't to take away any other, minority struggles that have definitely been the case during the height of the George Floyd protests, but there was not a single mention of Asian Americans this whole talk.
Why is that?
They said the whole thing of oh yeah, we'll make sure we'll do a better job next time. But then a couple of days later, the head of diversity essentially called me just addressing the question that I asked.
Right off the bat, she didn't want to listen.
He accused me of getting too heated about it, which I didn't think I was. Me bringing this up was going to take away from the other minorities' efforts, and that wasn't the point at all. It was more like, hey, could I just be part of the conversation? Even in these environments, right, where corporate America is only really going to attach themselves to what's going to make them money or not lose them money, we weren't even part of that conversation.
Oh yes, I made it alive. It's your drive, headed to paradise.
A lot of Asian hate crimes have been on the rise, especially during the onset of COVID. It's not this whole new thing that's been happening over the last few months, but no one talked about that. And especially the news, no one gave a shit until it really became profitable and it started to fit a narrative. Because let's be real, no one gave a shit about Asian hate crimes until a deranged white guy decided to shoot us up.
What we see is a performative nature of news, and it's more about picking the stories that sells and fits in the narrative, rather than actually reporting on the atrocities. Because you can't do much with minorities attacking, other minorities like Asians. There's a lot more material that you can get from a white person attacking us, fitting the whole narrative of the white versus minority narrative that both liberals and conservatives can eat up in their own little ways. But ultimately, what this all creates is an environment where
a lot of minorities going against one another, pitting minorities against each other instead of really going after the real problem, right? A few months. If you read any of these Instagram infographics and go to the comments, a lot of it is literally just a race war.
Fighting over who's the bigger victim.
saying shit like, now they know how they feel, instead of focusing on the real problem.
When has racism become a competition? Like, what the hell is that gonna solve? So now what's the solution?
What can we do as a people?
Allow yourself to be heard unapologetically, and don't shy away from the confrontation that you were taught to avoid growing up.
People bully us.
To roll down their window and call us names like chink because they know that they can get away with it. When actions don't have direct consequences,
Our silence becomes normalized.
so does our issues.